Hello there. This is Brian,
I'm Patrick.
and this is episode 1 of Hard Compound, our weekly Formula One podcast. We're going to break down the race, break down the upcoming race, the constructor's title, look at the money spent, look at some of the technology going into it, and all that fun stuff. The coverage, the fans. So we hope you enjoy it. Okay, little son, what are you drinking?
Yeah, so today I have El Sully. It's a Mexican lager from 21st Amendment Brewery in San Francisco, California. It's a nice, refreshing Mexican cerveza. Would highly recommend it to anybody looking for something like that.
Awesome. I am drinking here in Michigan El Rojo, Griffin Claw. It's a Michigan beer. Let's give it a try. It's my first time. It's pretty rich. It's good. That's good stuff. I think it's kind of interesting. You're probably too young to even know this, but I think maybe the theme of today's episode should be America. America with respect to F1. Even in the 90s, America was not known for beer. And now I would say we are probably the world leader in beer. I don't think there's even a close second, honestly. I think the variety, I think the types of beers, the variety of beers, the quality of beers, accessibility of beers, what I can buy here in Michigan, what you can get in California or Texas, what friends can get in Georgia and Florida, I don't think anybody is really even close. And that's pretty shocking to me. And I think that's why I think this first episode is going to have sort of an American theme to it, because we're going to look at America's views on F1, American drivers in F1, and go from there. But why don't we get started with last week's race, first round in Austria? What did you think?
I mean, it was a pretty fun race. I think we've had quite a few interesting and exciting races this season. Last week, I don't think was too different. The outcome was relatively predictable, I think. You know, the 2 Red Bull drivers and 2 Mercedes drivers up at the top again. But I think the midfield is really interesting this season. We have some really good drivers that are starting to prove themselves. Guys like Norris and Gasly, I think. And then some teams who have cars that are pretty close in kind of speed and ability on pretty much any track. So we get some pretty good battles between Ferrari, McLaren, Aston, all those, right? And I think last week was no different from that. It was overall a pretty entertaining race, I think.
Yeah, I sort of think so too. I'm disappointed at Leclerc for taking Gasly out. Like, I thought Gasly had a real shot at even top 5 finish, certainly top 10. And I'm cheering for Gasly. I think he got a raw deal by Red Bull, and that the AlphaTauri team is kind of young and fun. So I was a little disappointed, but yeah, overall I think it's the mid pack. Mercedes still probably has the better car, but for Verstappen, I think if he's close enough, that's all he needs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Perez was still finding his way. Norris is doing an amazing job. You mentioned Norris. I'm just shocked at how well he's been doing. I think is he ahead of Bottas in the standings?
Maybe. I don't think so. He's like 10 points behind Bottas or Perez, maybe something like that. But he is up there in the standings. He's like, I don't know, 50 points ahead of Ricardo or something like that. So
yeah. Let's talk about Ricardo in a little bit. The setting looks good, and I think especially with COVID, it's understandable why F1 would have multiple races in one location. Like they're going back to Austria this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The track didn't seem to me anything special. But yeah, I thought overall it was fun. We sort of knew who first and second would be and who third and fourth would be. And kind of like, the fun is then in the start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of the
definitely.
chaos in the start, and then a lot of stuff in the middle. And I noticed like a lot of people I saw on social media were upset that Leclerc got driver of the day because he sort of he started where he finished where he started. But it was like in that kind of chaos, where he took out Gasly, and at first I was upset with him, but as I watched the onboards, I thought, yeah, that's slightly aggressive, but I think that's a racing incident that happens. And so he did. He had to really work for it to get up there after that first lap.
Yeah, I mean, I think like normally it's kind of funny. I don't think Leclerc gets the credit that he necessarily deserves. But last week, I think I'm kind of with most people. I don't think he deserved driver of the day. I know that he did like work hard to get back to that spot. I mean, he had that first lap incident with Gasly, but I mean, when you're looking at driver of the day, the whole day counts. And I think he screwed up pretty badly on that first lap, ended somebody else's race, and put himself way at the back of the pack. I would have preferred giving it to like Sainz or Norris. I mean, Sainz had a bad qualifying and then came up
He did,
and
yeah,
got what, sixth in the race. I mean, he
yeah.
I think he outperformed most people last week. So
I think if there's any, because I like Leclerc, I think all these great young drivers, but I think if there's any criticism of him, it's sort of like he thinks, hey, I drive for Ferrari, so I should be at the top. I should be at the front of the pack, but that Ferrari car just isn't that good, and so I think he, I don't know, overcompensates, get overly aggressive, makes some irrational moves sometimes, and it paid off for him, I guess, this week. I mean, he did okay, but yeah, I mean, he took out some folks, and I don't know. It will, it happens. Oh well,
yeah,
it happens. But I think you're right. All the fun is in the middle of the pack right now, or to see who comes in first. Can someone not Mercedes come in first?
right. Yeah. I mean, I think like Leclerc is, you were kind of alluding to, I think he works to get the absolute most out of that car. Ferrari has been kind of going backwards as a constructor for the last few years, and he's been able to kind of keep them afloat, I think. And
Yeah,
getting signs, I think, was a big deal for Ferrari too. He's proven that he's a reliable and a really good driver. But yeah, I think Leclerc's faults lie in how hard he pushes. I think
yeah,
it's
I agree.
both his saving grace and also like his downfall. Kind
Right,
of like how
right.
Verstappen was in his first few seasons. He ended a lot of his own races.
Yeah,
But now you can see like he's matured and he really knows when to push and when to hold back. And I think that's something Leclerc really needs to figure out.
yeah. Leclerc, yeah, he sort of also just needs to accept. I think that car is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It maybe, let's see, fourth, fifth pack, fifth. I don't know. It's I
Yeah.
mean, but after Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, then you start thinking, well, okay, maybe Ferrari belongs
Right.
there. So, and I
Right.
think he
Yeah.
doesn't want to believe that. So, yeah. But here's back to my having my American beer here and talking about the drivers. So, one thing I wanted to talk about was it looked like I did some quick research. Mario Andretti was the last American driver to win, and that was in 1978, which is so long ago. That was before I had cable. That was before I had ever heard of such a thing called cable, let alone, streaming, internet, computers,
A cell phone.
you know, cell phones, Pac Man. So I was kind of wanting to get your thoughts on that. Like, do you think we'll ever have an American driver? Or maybe first ask, why aren't there American drivers in F1?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because I became a fan of F1 by chance, I think. I was bored scrolling through channels and was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And watched Fernando Alonso when I think it was the year that he won with Renault.
Oh, it
And
was a while ago.
it was a while ago, but that's kind of when I got hooked on F1. But I haven't seen an American in F1, an American prospect, or really anyone that I know that is interested in F1 aside from like the Formula SAE team that I was on in college.
Nice, nice. Yeah, maybe that helps. It's sort of like, I'm old enough to remember, Pele at the twilight of his career playing, I think, in New York when they were trying to get soccer established in the US and it took another 30 years. I really thought because for me, I was F1 back before cable when there was Mario Andretti. Indy was big, and I would watch Indy as a child, and you would see clips from like Wide World of Sports. Every now and again, you would see an F1 race. I thought, wow, that looks just as fun as Indy, except if I remember correctly, like some of these were what they call street courses, I think, and I thought that might even be more fun. And then, but there just was no coverage. In the '80s, I got to see a little bit of it. In the '90s, with cable and so forth, still really didn't see anything. I mean, heck, I think it was easier to catch Australian rules football than F1, but I could watch a bit. Part of it though was because of a lot of the tech was getting covered, so a lot of the tech industry that I was in was looking at it, and also who's the Canadian who died?
Villeneuve, you're talking about?
Villeneuve, how do you say that? Yeah, Villeneuve. It, like, so we get some news from over from Canada, but it was until the 2000s, it was pretty hard. But since then, I've been able to watch it and watch every race. And I hadn't really thought much about an American driver, but when Haas entered, and really, you really thought, well, they'll eventually get one American driver. Or now, before Honda said they were getting out, I mean, Honda's so big in Indy, you always thought, well, there must be a Honda driver program where they're going to spot some young American and say, hey, we think you belong in F1.
hmm hmm
I
Yeah,
don't know.
I don't know. I think, there's two big auto racing things in the US already, right? You look at Indy and NASCAR, and those are wildly more popular in the US than F1. And I think a lot of it has to do with like excitement around I don't know, like I guess for NASCAR specifically, it's like bumper cars. You can just crash into
Yeah,
people and it's all cool. And for whatever reason that's exciting to people.
yeah.
And then, like, in NASCAR, especially, they do almost exclusively ovals. So you can see the whole race the whole time it's happening. You can see everything. For F1, you're doing these upwards of 2.5, 3 mile circuits, and you can only see one bit of it if you're there. Right. And I think that doesn't appeal to Americans all that much. You're like, I want to see all of the action all of the time.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that actually. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because like I hate to say anything negative about NASCAR because those are my people. Those are our people. But I hate NASCAR. I don't even understand it. I'm like, there's like 30, 40 cars here and they're bumping. I don't even get it. I was also though wondering, because Americans were sort of like the notion of leaving America to go somewhere else to make your fortune, to make your mark. We don't even think that way. Everyone comes here. If you're going to make your mark, you make it in America. And if you're already in America, you would never leave to go elsewhere. And it just seems like if you want to be an F1, you need to start it young. They get in karting, which we don't really have karting here, not that level. The idea of leaving America and going over to say Europe to practice, and I also just think though the money involved. It's like if your father is that rich that he could sponsor a team, he's going to sponsor an indie team. Or if he's that rich and the parents can afford to have you in karting and have you get in the best and do all of it for years, well, you're probably not going to leave America and go there. So you're going to stay in Indy, if that was kind of racing. So yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to see an American again, even just as a driver. I don't know who all the alternate drivers are or the sim drivers are, but I wonder if there's even an American in that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because I do agree. I think if you, like you mentioned earlier, a Honda driver program, something like that, right? It seems unlikely to me that the very best of them would be Americans in such a program. And even if there were Americans in that program, like you said, they're most likely going to Indy. There's really no straightforward path from the US into F1, right? Pretty much all of it happens in Europe. So if you get sponsored, you're either going to Europe or you're going to Indy. There's no other option. And I think it's very unlikely that of those two options, you're going to choose to go overseas for the chance to make your way through F2 and F3, right? To get up to F1, right? It just,
Right, right, right. It's so unlikely you're ever going to be an F1 driver that, right, why would you leave home, spend all that money when you could maybe be in and
yeah, because there's just so much uncertainty with that. Because I think all of the drivers in F1 are incredible drivers. I think we all know that. But I don't know if we would all agree that the 20 drivers in F1 are the 20 best drivers in the world. A lot depends on how much money you have, or if you're in a certain program at a certain time, or you get called up to the F1 team at just the wrong moment and you get 1 year of racing and then you're cut, right? It's like,
right, like Albon did or
exactly.
something, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's a good enough path to make F1 a viable option if you're a young American karting champion or whatever, right? So,
Yeah, I agree, and though actually for another episode, we'll have to think of, like, who are the top drivers not in F1, like,
yeah.
like Stoffel Van Dorn, I think, maybe there's some couple guys still in Indy. Yeah, I saw an interview recently or heard with Roman Grosjean, and because he's now out of F1, but he's in Indy, and he was saying it's a lot easier to transition from F1 to Indy than Indy to F1. The cars, the teams, the steering column, everything he was saying. It's just the transition is much easier. So I think he's probably true, but I don't think that's the reason why. I think if you're a talented enough driver, you can figure that stuff out. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is I don't know that there's much of a point in going from Indy to F1, right? It's like you're a professional racing driver. I don't know what kinds of contracts these guys have signed. Obviously, you hear about some in F1, like Alonso's, $35 million deal or whatever, right? But I just wouldn't think that that would even enter into somebody's brain and go, okay, I'm gonna make the transition from Indy to F1 solely to be an F1 driver instead of an Indy driver. But
right, right, right. I mean, maybe some they were guaranteed a seat, but yeah. So speaking of Roman Grosjean, I can remember. I think what were we were driving back from, was it Charleston? I think it was.
oh yeah,
'Cause, we get F1 TV streaming, and I was driving, so I wasn't looking at the phone, and you were looking at the phone, and you had the race on, I could hear it, and you were like, "I think Roman just died."
yeah. That was pretty crazy because yeah, that was last year. We were driving from Charleston back to Ann Arbor, and we were watching that race in Bahrain, right? And that was when Grosjean had his fiery accident. and
Yeah,
I
that was
literally paused the stream because I thought he died. I
yeah, no,
mean, he
you
went
were like, "I
straight
think
into
Roman
the
Grosjean just
barrier.
died."
Yeah, he went straight
Yeah,
into the barrier, and you see a
at, like,
massive
what, 200?
explosion. And like, I was like, there's no way that he just
Right,
survived that.
right.
And I
He
paused
crashes
it
into
because
the barrier.
it freaked me out. I was like, I don't think I can watch this right now. And a couple minutes later, I restarted it, and it was like, oh, it took him 15 seconds to get out of the car and like go on. But
But it's still amazing. I mean, it was like, I don't know, 200 miles an hour, let's say, crashes into a barrier. You think, well, then he's dead. Well, okay, maybe he could survive that. But then you see the car is split in half. So you think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. What a horrible death that is. And you think, well, if he's maybe he was in a bubble and on one side and he's still alive. Well, now it exploded and there's a fire and it's going on
Yeah.
for 30 seconds. So you think, well, then he's just absolutely dead. There is no way. This is a horrible end to his F1 career. This is such a tragedy. And then, yeah, you one pause it. I start looking too. I'm trying to drive, and it was just incredible. I mean, it's like you see him coming out and they're spraying him down, and I mean, I'm just shocked. I mean, he's driving. I mean, he's driving in Indy now. He's not. I mean, he's doing okay, but just
Yeah.
that alone, he's
Yeah.
driving in Indy
It's pretty
after that.
pretty
It's pretty shocking.
unreal
So
how little injury, I guess, that he came out of that with, right? You look at that, and I mean, I did. I assumed that he was dead. Like there was absolutely no way that he survived that. And he basically came out with some burns and like a cracked rib or whatever, right? It was like, okay,
right,
well that's
mild concussion. It's
unreal.
just
Yeah.
it is. You almost wonder everything went miraculously right, and so you sort of hope F1. I mean, because they do such a great job with safety that they don't just sort of stand down and say, okay, well, we don't need to do anymore because was that was perfect. And you think, look, by the grace of God, that man is still alive. I don't care anything about your protocols or who was on the scene. He should not be alive. And so hopefully they're still sort of trying to advance safety as best they
Hmm.
can.
Hmm.
So
I mean, I think they have to. They just have to keep going because in the last 5 years or something like that, it's we saw Bianchi die in an F1 car. We saw
yeah, that was awful.
Alexander die. Was it last year or 2 years ago that he died in F2? Right? It's like,
Oh, yeah. You mean like Antonio?
yeah, Charles Leclerc's friend, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like just tragic things that happen where it's the opposite of what happened at Grosjean, right? It's everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, but you still have to plan for that and try to figure out how you can do better in those situations. And I think Formula One and the FIA are constantly working to improve safety, but I think it's just, at no point can you really stop and say, okay, this is good enough.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's good that you brought up the Bianchi incident, even though I wish I hadn't, because that one just always just is. It's like, oh, young, handsome F1 driver living in Monaco. This is the life. The race should have been probably stopped
Right.
before
Yeah.
his accident.
Yeah.
I don't even like. Yeah, that one was just awful. I don't even like to think of that one. Everything that went right, I mean, everything that could go right did for Grosjean, and just the opposite
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Jules. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's awful. Speaking of what's right and what's wrong, I don't know how we, cross over, transition from that morose topic. What do you think is wrong with Ricardo? I mean, you mentioned Sainz. He moved to Ferrari this year. Ricardo moved to McLaren, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know. We're what, 8, we're 9, 10 races in, something like that. And he's not doing anything to make me think he deserves that seat in McLaren. I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, I mean it's a weird thing that's happening, right? Because we had a lot of drivers, like veteran drivers, switch teams or come back, right? We have, Sainz, Vettel, Perez, Alonso, along with Ricardo, all kind of coming into new situations, right? And I think Ricardo, of all of those guys, is having the most difficult time transitioning. I don't know if it has to do with how difficult that McLaren is to get a hold of. And because Norris has been there for several seasons now, that he's really coming into his own now. But Ricardo is just getting outperformed by Norris week in and week out. And quite frankly, it looks like he's lost at times. I'm not really sure what's going on with him because you think about how he finished the year with Renault last year, right? Like he was on the top of his game. And you thought, oh, this is going to be a big pickup for McLaren. And he just hasn't done it. He's finished, I think, sixth 3 times this season, and that's his best finish of the season, and only finished ahead of Norris once this year. He's only gotten to Q3 in half of the races this year. Meanwhile, Norris has made it to Q3 in every race, right? So he is struggling to find a way to cope with that car. I think a lot more than any of those other veteran drivers that also made changes in the offseason.
Yeah, that's interesting. Didn't realize he was that bad because I mean, you're right. I mean, Perez is seems to be finding his way.
Mhm, mhm.
Alonso, I think, is now sort of surpassed Ocon, but that, I mean, it's still early in the season. But you're right; it's sort of like okay, he's now getting as much from that car as anyone could. Vettel, I think Vettel is kind of like Raikkonen, where it's like, hey, man, there's no better job in the world than F1. I'll do all I can.
Yeah, yeah, I think
There's no
Vettel,
intensity necessarily
yeah,
there,
he
but
doesn't have
but
anything to
he's
prove,
fine.
right?
But yeah, Ricardo, man, I don't know. I've never been as much as I like him, and I think that's probably the most fun team, Norris and Ricardo.
Yeah.
I can't say he's a great driver, even though he's had a great career. I mean, a decade or close to it. But yeah, that's I don't know what's wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's just still, still trying to figure out the car, the team, what works best.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe by the end of this season we'll be eating our words, but yeah, so far he has not proven up to the challenge of this McLaren. So,
Yeah, because I mean, I would say, maybe Verstappen's the best driver out there right now, but Perez is, around third or fourth. Stroll and Vettel are fairly close. Alonso and Ocon are close. Yeah, Ricardo, that's a big gap between him and Norris. And as much as Norris is impressing me, I'm not ready to say he's one of the all time greats. And he just, just,
yeah.
there's no way Ricardo can equal him. But yeah, that's no good. So, what do you think of Verstappen what he's doing this year?
I think Verstappen finally has a car that's close enough to the Mercedes where he's showing everybody that he actually is the best driver on the grid currently. I have thought that he's been the best driver for the last 3 seasons, maybe, but it just didn't come because that Mercedes was so much better than anybody else. And I mean, Hamilton, of course, is one of the best drivers of all time and could totally handle that car and you know squeeze out Verstappen every single race. But now those two teams are getting so much closer that Verstappen is really proving to everybody that he is the best driver.
No, I agree. I think I would say right. At least the past few seasons, he's been the best driver on the grid. Um, and if he keeps this up, will be considered one of the all time great drivers. And um, I didn't think they had any real chance last year, and if not for some unfortunate incidents where he got taken out, I think he may have even come in second. That beat the Mercedes. So yeah, he's definitely dominant. And now speaking of Verstappen and Hamilton, Verstappen actually has the lead right now. I don't know if it will last. I mean, I just think the Mercedes team, the money, the talent, they're just such a dominant car that I think Verstappen has to be 100%, 100% of the time. I don't know if that's going to be feasible. We'll see. But at the moment, he's in the lead. And one reason he's in the lead is because when his tires died, was that in Baku? When his
Yeah, that was
tire,
in Baku. Yeah, yeah,
that was so bad. I mean, you think he's going to win the race, and then his tires just give out.
yeah, yeah,
But when they restarted it, Hamilton screwed up. He did something on the brake, and I wanted to ask you what that was. What did he do with his brakes or something? I mean, because he should now be maybe in first place,
yeah.
but he took
Right.
himself out of that race.
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely one of the most notable lockups of the season, I think. He basically took himself out at the restart of that race. and ended up not scoring any points in that race and gave Verstappen's teammate Perez the win, right? So
Still shocked about that. I
yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
was
that
such.
was
I mean, you're right. I've never seen a lockup. I've seen lockups cost someone a position, but never
right.
the
Yeah,
podium. I mean, never from first to nothing.
exactly, because that was right at the start of a restart. Because I forget who was it, maybe Stroll that crashed and caused like a red flag or something like that in the race, and so they restarted. Perez was in first, but didn't look like he was gonna be able to hold off Hamilton in that first turn. But Hamilton just went straight through because he locked up.
What does that mean? I'm not sure because like I've been following F1 for so long, but I'm still, like there's certain things where like, oh, he locked up. I'm like, oh, did he have no traction and his brakes just sort of not work? What does that mean
Yeah,
exactly?
so basically like F1 cars don't have ABS like road cars do, right? So drivers pretty much need to get their braking perfect in order to like not lock up their brakes or not go too far through a corner. And so basically a lockup is when a driver applies too much force to the brakes and that causes the brake discs essentially and wheels to rotate slower than the car is actually moving. So that's
Okay.
when you get like the tires scraping along the track and we get a nice big cloud of white smoke, right? So that's pretty much what lockup means is the tires aren't rotating at the same speed the car is moving.
I see. Well, that actually does help me understand that. Now, what if, like, are there certain cars? So if the Haas team is locking up more, is that technical, or is it just Mazepin and Schumacher aren't that great?
I think that is less on the technical or engineering side than it is on the driver's side. The drivers really need to be locked in and get their braking point and their force on the brake pedal just right in order to be able to slow the car down as quickly as they can, but without locking up, right? So that they can hit that apex and then accelerate out of the corner as quickly as possible. So the engineering of the brake system is pretty interesting and kind of complex, but really the lockup isn't as much a technical issue as it is a driver issue, at least in my opinion. Right? Like brakes, you see a lot of lockups during restarts or during the start of the race because the brakes are cold. So they need to be in an optimal temperature range in order to work as effectively as they can. And that's kind of why you see guys weaving during a safety car, things like that, which I think is why Hamilton locked up at the start of that restart in Baku because his brakes just weren't up to temperature. And so he just slipped right through that turn and ended up costing him the race, I think.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it could come down to that. We'll see. I hope so, just because I mean, Mercedes has been dominant for so long. You want to see real competition, not just every race, but over the course of the season.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
yeah, that was a pretty big mistake on the Hamilton Mercedes part. Real quick, we mentioned Alonso and Ocon on the team, the Alpine slash Renault team. What did you think? Because I think it was just a couple weeks ago where they agreed to sign Ocon to like a 3-year deal. What did you think, that was a wise move or
Yeah, I
unwise? Or
mean, I think Ocon is a good driver. I liked him actually when he first came into F1 and then kind of immediately got the boot,
yeah,
which kind of made me disappointed. I think he looked really promising when he first came in, and I think he's another solid driver. And I think we talked about the midfield battles at the start, and I think he's one of those guys that really pushes the pack along. You kind of always see him getting into scraps. I don't know that I notice him, moving up as often as I see him moving back in the pack, but I think, those guys are just as important to the sport as anybody else. I think they make it just as entertaining. And I mean, a Frenchman to sign with a French team, I think, is totally a wise move. So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he has sponsor money. And so, but he's French. He's a solid driver. I wouldn't say he's a great driver, but he's a solid driver. He's French. I think the Renault team probably needs some stability. I think Alonso probably will stay with them because I think he's shown that he's definitely wants to remain in F1, and there's no seat likely to become available on a top team. So I think that's a quality team they have there, Alonso and Ocon. We'll see. I don't think he's a great driver, but it's the Renault car, the Alpine car. I'm not sure is anything special. So, but as you said, a lot of these guys are one and done. Some of the top drivers in the world don't ever make it. If Ocon can sign a 3-year deal, go for it. That's the dream job. You're an F1 driver.
yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think Ocon is just one of those guys that's going to keep his head down and keep driving. I mean, he to me reminds me of another Frenchman that we already talked about, Romain Grosjean. I mean, he was in F1 for a long time, right? And he never won anything, but you look at the guy and he was a solid driver throughout his career. And I think Ocon could be a similar kind of driver. So,
yeah, I think Ocon is a maybe a bit better. Grosjean, I think, was a solid driver, but then might do something ridiculous, something foolish.
that's probably true.
But whereas Ocon seems to have a bit more of a stable mentality there.
hmm
But yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's wise on Ocon's part. He's now going to be an F1 driver for a few years. Can't turn that down. And for Alpine, they get a solid driver, F1. They got Alonso, the big name, and we'll see. I hope they improve.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything to impress me. The team, I don't mean that negatively against Ocon or Alonso, but the car, the team, that
Yeah.
engine.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it seems like Renault or Alpine just, wants a couple of drivers that will vie to get points every week. And I think Ocon is one of those guys where it's like he's probably not going to do anything to put the team out,
Yeah,
but
that's a good
he
point.
could do enough to get in the points. And I think that's what a team like Alpine needs. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, and I think that's sort of what he can do. That's his strength. So, yeah. Why don't we close this out? I One of the things that here when it's hockey season, I always like to watch is the pregame show for the Red Wings, and they do something called Light the Lamp. I know you know what it is, which is for that game, the host will say who they think will get the most points or who they think will stop the most goals. And then they sort of add up the totals over the course of the season to see who's best. I don't know yet what our light the lamp or our across the line ranking should be. We'll have to table that one for a bit, but I did want to get your thoughts on who you think kind of the top drivers are on the grid now, and or who do you think is doing the best this year?
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Verstappen is the top guy right now. He would definitely top my list for best drivers on the grid. And another guy we mentioned earlier, I have as the number 2 guy on the grid right now, and that's Lando Norris. He has surpassed all my expectations for a McLaren driver this season. And
Same with
yeah,
me. Those are my number one, too. Yeah.
yeah, every week he does way better, at least on race day, than I had expected him to.
I feel the same. Before you get to your third, I mean, Verstappen, I think, is the best. And I think he's been the best really driver on the grid for the last few years. And had you asked me to predict that, that's an easy prediction. Norris, the number 2, like you said, I don't think I ever would have predicted that Norris would
Yeah,
be this deep into the season the second best. So, but you and I agree, I think, on 1 and 2. So, who do
yeah,
you think
yeah.
third?
I think my third might be moderately controversial. I have Perez as my number 3 driver on the season.
Mm.
He has been, I mean, I know he's like 60 points down on Verstappen or whatever right now, but I think he has been the best of the drivers coming into new teams. And he has really taken a fight to the Mercedes drivers, which the last, three Red Bull drivers didn't really do.
Right.
So I've been impressed by his performance with that team so far this season.
Interesting. For me, my surprise number three, I would say, is Hamilton. Hamilton has had it so easy. You know, I don't want to take anything away from him necessarily, but I think over the last several years, the worst Mercedes was ever going to do was number two.
Mm.
So instead of finishing number two, Hamilton finishes number one. A great accomplishment, but finishing number one when you realistically only going to be one or two, you know.
Right, right. Pretty much all he had to do was beat Botas, right? So,
Right, beat Bottas. I think there's plenty of drivers on the grid who can beat Bottas. But I think this year, Red Bull has improved enough to where they're a striking distance. And I think there's kind of a combination of lethargy at Mercedes
mhm.
and just kind of a sort of acceptance. Well, things always have to come to an end. We had the best car during the hybrid era. It was so good that only one time was there ever any doubt that we wouldn't have both cars, one and two.
Yeah.
And and I think Hamilton is, along with Toto Wolff, I think is sort of like kind of rallying the troops, making sure everyone is focused, still bringing it 100%. When I think for a lot of other drivers, I think they would just say, well, we had our time. And I think Hamilton, to his credit, is not yet ready to say that. So I think he would be my number three. So I
Yeah.
think let's do five now. So what do you think would be your fourth and fifth?
Yeah. So I have Gasly surprisingly at fourth and Hamilton at fifth.
No.
So yeah, Hamilton, for a lot of the same reasons you were saying, I gave him points, but I also deducted him points because it's the same, right? It's like he does have an exceptional car. It's not like he has to work as hard as a Norris to get in the top 5 every single week. But to his credit, like you were saying, he's pushing that team. We see how far Botas has fallen, and Hamilton is still pushing Verstappen and Perez every week. And yeah, I think he's proving that he's not going to relinquish his spot as as the world champion all that easily to Verstappen. So I think that has been impressive for him. And for Gasly, I think he's in like not a wonderful car. He's got kind of a firecracker teammate in Yuki Tsunoda and is constantly getting into battles with guys who have what I think are better cars than he does. And he, I think ever since his kind of miracle win last season in Italy, he has really gotten a boost from that, I think, and it is carried over into this season. And, if not for a couple of unfortunate incidents, most recently, Leclerc basically destroying his rear suspension, he would be pretty high up in the world championship points.
Yeah, Gasly, I think, is doing a great job. And I think the win last year helped him, that kind of crazy win. But I also think, it's unfortunate for Albon. Alexander Albon got booted from Red Bull. And, you can argue whether it was justified or not. But I think when Gasly saw that, I think he realized, that second seat alongside Max at Red Bull is nearly impossible. And so I think a lot of the self doubts kind of went away. And now he's
Mm,
just kicking.
mhm,
So
mhm.
but I think for me, I would have different four and five. My fourth, I think, would be Leclerc. I mean, the pressure for driving for Ferrari, and especially when Ferrari, I think, is not that good. I just don't think that car is very good. He brings it every single week.
Mm,
He's keeping them
mhm.
in the points. I think he saved them last year from utter collapse. So I think he does get a little messy at the start, especially, but I would say he's my number four. And then my fifth, partly nostalgia, but I would say is Alonso. He came into a new team.
Mm,
It's not a great
hmm.
car. It took him a few races, but he's now doing better than his teammate. And I mean, when you look at him at the start, those starts, it's like somehow he takes that Alpine and gets fifth, for example.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a short time, but it's like no one seems to jump off the line and weave their way through traffic like him. So partly out of nostalgia, but I also think he's my number five. So
Yeah, yeah. Those are two of my favorite drivers on the grid. I think both of them are a lot of fun to watch. And I think that they have kind of a similar mentality where they are gonna go 100% every single race and occasionally stick their nose where it doesn't belong. And sometimes it
right.
works out and sometimes it doesn't. I think I agree with you. Both of them have been impressive drivers this season. They're slightly further down on my list just because of, Leclerc. I think this season is maybe trying to prove that he's the number one guy at Ferrari and not let Sainz kind of take that glory from him. And
Right.
so he's gotten a little bit too pushy in a couple of races and like in Monaco, right? He had pole position in the bag and he blew it and he couldn't race in that race. A couple of
That's his home.
mental mistakes that have pushed him down a little bit further on my list. And then Alonso, I love Alonso. He's the reason I got into Formula One. But I think the start of his season just, wasn't all that great. He was still getting used to that, to the car and to the team. And so right now he's kind of like middle of the pack on my power rankings, if you will. But I think if he keeps driving the way he's been driving in the last couple of races, he'll definitely move up that list.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I also think, speaking of Alonso, back to the discussion about Ocon signing a multi-year deal. I mean, I think that actually helped the team as a whole because I mean, I think if Ocon was just there contracted through this year, Alonso would have just eaten him alive. Like, all right, you're nothing, get out. I'm getting the best resources of the team. I'm getting everyone's focus on me. Even at this kind of older age, this more experienced Alonso, I think he still would have done it. I think signing Ocon to multiple years, I think was like Alpine saying, look, we need two drivers.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm, mhm.
you know, this can't be like McLaren a few years ago when they were getting back in. So do you have, let's close it out. Do you have any predictions for Sunday's second go around in Austria that I'm going to have to watch on ESPN?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It should be, well, I don't know. I think it'll be an interesting race just because it's 1 week later, same track, same deal. And I think that Mercedes is going to come hard, I think. And I am going to go out and say that Hamilton is going to take pole. And I think he's probably going to win the race as well. So that's kind of the big prediction I have. Yeah.
I think mine is similar. It's going to flip. So instead of Verstappen Hamilton, it'll be Hamilton Verstappen,
Mm,
and instead of Bottas Perez, it'll be Perez Bottas. So Hamilton
interesting. Yeah.
Verstappen Perez Bottas, and I don't think we're going to have any craziness at the start, but I'm always up for it. So let's hope I'm.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see how Gasly comes back in this race and to
Oh
see if
yeah,
he can find the pace that he did show last week and actually finish the race. And I think guys like Ocon and Ricardo didn't have good performances last week, and I think they really need to show up this week. They have last week's race under their belts. They're going to need to figure out how to find pace in their car because their teammates are really showing that their cars do have pace.
right. And I mean, Russell had a good race. He
Mm-hmm.
could have been in the top 10. Once again, the Williams car, there's no reliability. It's kind of
Yeah.
soft garbage. I think it's going to be the same again. It's just a bad car. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another DNF for him, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, there's some kind of deal with the devil he's made where he gets to be an F1 driver, but in a car that really,
Yeah. Well,
that really shouldn't be an F1.
we'll see if he unseats Bottas next season at Mercedes. But yeah, for now, it's got to be frustrating to start his F1 career in that car. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks, son. Looking forward to letting everybody know. We'll be here after the next Austria race. So hope you all join us.
Awesome.
Take care, Patrick.
Thanks.